We'll take you on our campaign to demand a freer media space, a society in which journalists, media organizations, and indeed players are able to practice without fear of favor. Hashtag is Defend Media Freedom. For Monday, we brought you a series of conversations from people who work with the media or are directly affected by the work of journalists. We've also told stories of how some journalists have been brutalized or assaulted in their line of duty. We continue today with two conversations, one with Kwesi Pratt Jr. and another with journalist and politician Alhassan Suhini. First, here's MFR Apal's conversation with Kwesi Pratt.
You're welcome to JoyNews channel on Multi TV. It's our campaign on defending media freedom. And today, of course, some would say that there is no way you can talk about media freedom without talking about the likes of Mr. Kwesi Pratt. And we're privileged to be in his office today at the Inside newspaper here in Kokomlemle. And he joins us for this campaign. We are grateful for your time here on JoyNews, Mr. Pratt.
Hi.
Hi, Mr. Pratt. So we're just informing you about a campaign that multimedia is rolling out on the hashtag Defend Media Freedom. Would you say it's a little too late or is coming at an opportune time?
No, I don't think that is late, and I don't think that is coming at an opportune time. You know, freedom is something that we have to be fighting for every day, every hour, you know, all the time. So there's no opportune time, and it can never be late.
But do you think it is a fight that we can ever win?
We've won the fight in many respects. I mean, look, I don't think that you can separate media freedom from the freedoms that are enjoyed by citizens. You understand? Basically, what we call media freedom, the right of free expression, and so on, are also freedoms that citizens have to enjoy. It's not just for media people and so on. And I believe very strongly that the struggle against colonialism was itself part of the struggle to enhance, you know, the enjoyment of media freedom. And if you look at all these obnoxious laws, the laws of sedition, the laws of libel and so on, they're all part of the colonial heritage. You know, these were not laws which were introduced after independence. They were introduced before independence by the colonial administration. So we need to strengthen this fight, you know, for everybody to be able to express themselves freely. And it's in this same vein that I also think that infractions by the media do not justify attacks on liberty. I mean, I'm a journalist. If I write material that can be considered seditious or libelous and so on, it should not justify taking away of freedoms, you know, which would affect everybody in society.
Well, it's just taking us to the issue about responsibility and accountability that comes with the freedom that we enjoy as a media. But that will come up shortly. But I would first want to find out your assessment of the media in terms of the freedom. You've seen it all from the dictatorship regimes that we've had all the way till today. Of course, the likes of you, Mr. Kweku Baako, Harunata, Kofi Kumsin, amongst others, will be named when it comes to the fight for media freedom that we are enjoying now. But what would be your assessment as what you see now?
Well, I think we should all be deeply worried, you know, about the level of enjoyment of freedoms in our society today. And when you have a situation where a journalist has just been shot, that should be frightening. I mean, you cannot be praising government or praising any other institution for making it possible for us to express ourselves freely when somebody has just been shot, you understand? I think it's also important for us to understand very clearly in your own outfit. I mean, a very seasoned senior journalist and so on had to run away from the country because he was seeking safety. This is no time for praise singing. This is the time to intensify, you know, the struggle for freedoms for all citizens, for media people and so on. You understand?
Do you think that with all the struggle that we've talked about, what you've all done, even towards getting the 1992 Constitution, in which that media freedom is also enshrined in Chapter 12, for instance, do you think that as a society, as a people, we really understand the role that the media played in the freedom and the democracy that we have as a country as it stands now?
Well, first of all, I mean, sometimes I'm utterly shocked by some statements that are made by media practitioners. I mean, only this morning I've been reading in the newspapers statements made by media practitioners to the effect that if the media is not responsible, then the freedoms will be taken away. And this is an utterly irresponsible statement, especially coming from media practitioners. You understand? I mean, nothing justifies the limiting of the space for free expression. Nothing in the world can justify that. And I'm completely, deeply, abhorred when such statements come from media practitioners. Look, only recently, there was a lot of noise at the passage of the Right to Information Bill. And journalists are jumping over themselves to heap praises on governments and parliamentarians and so on. It's frightening. The United States of America has had the Right to Information law over decades. Only recently, even Congress in the United States of America was struggling to get the tax returns of the president. Congress cannot get information that it needs in spite of the existence of the Right to Information Bill. The UK has a Right to Information Bill. Journalists are killed in the UK, for publishing what is the truth, and so on. So what is all this noise about the Right to Information Bill, especially when our Right to Information Bill is defective? Defective to the extent that it excludes all matters of national security. Now, what are all matters of national security? What doesn't cover national security and so on? Defective to the extent that it excludes the presidency and so on. Defective to the extent that it excludes matters that are said to be in process and so on. And yet, media practitioners, journalists, jumping over themselves to please government, to praise government. It's insane. It's completely insane.
But some would say that it's been a struggle, and once it's happening now, it's worth praising, isn't it? It's just one step.
Look, the struggle is not over. We are just taking the tottering steps towards victory. This is no time for celebration. This is time to intensify the struggle. And you see, I believe very strongly that we need to constantly breach the boundaries of free expression. That is how you expand scope. You need to constantly be making efforts to breach the boundaries. Look, I sit down here today, and I recall that not too long ago, consumption of palm oil was a criminal offense. Not too long ago, consumption of local gin was a criminal offense. Not too long ago, the wearing of lipstick in the UK was a criminal offense, and so on. How did we come this far? Because we struggled, and people did not struggle at any point in time, did not stop struggling at any point in time. And that's what we ought to be doing.
And the struggle is on, for which reason we are launching this campaign, or we've launched this campaign, at least to defend media freedom. But you've been around, you are best placed to do this if you're in the position to. Are you able to compare what you've seen then throughout all the administrations, at least let's bring it down to the Rawlingses, down to the Jekumko Force, then to former Professor Mills, and then also Mahama, then the current administration under Nana Akufo-Addo, considering the infractions that were recorded over the period? At least you were in jail, for instance.
Well, I would not do that comparison because it doesn't serve any useful purpose. Look, all governments, even a government formed by saints, would abuse the rights of people if it is okay so to do, if it do not suffer any consequences. So when it comes to the right of free expression, when it comes to the liberty of citizens and so on, no government is better than the other. Every government will do the same if you allow them. It is the vigilance of citizens, it is the commitment of citizens to pursue, their own interests and so on, which gives us space to operate. This act of comparison and so on, tends to give the impression that some governments are okay and that others may not be and so on, when in reality, we are still where we are. Take the case of women, for example. Women are heavily discriminated against, whether they are in the practice of journalism or they are in the practice of medicine and so on. You understand? Again, I think that it's important for us to adopt a dialectical attitude to the issue of media freedoms and so on. How do you decouple the struggle for media freedom from the struggle for employment for everybody? How do you decouple the struggle for media freedom for the struggle for social amenities and so on? Look, let's say that on paper we guarantee the right of free expression and so on. If the vast majority of our people are illiterate, they are disadvantaged already. They cannot read what we write in the newspapers. They cannot write in the newspapers and so on. That's a limiting factor. So that struggle for literacy, that struggle to make everybody literacy, is an important component of the struggle for free expression. You understand? If we live in a society where the minimum wage cannot buy 2 newspapers a day, and people have to choose between buying a newspaper and buying food and so on, is a limit on free expression, and we need to be worried about that. If we live in a society in which lights go off, or some rural communities do not have access to electricity and so on, how do they access what we put on television? How do they access what we put on radio and so on? So it's a whole struggle, and we need to look at it from the dialectical point of view, to look at it from all the sides, and to see the extent to which all of this are interrelated and so on. There's a lot of work to be done.
A lot of work, but you think we'll ever get there, right? We're close to getting there.
Well, we'll keep getting closer and closer.
The problems become more as we get closer.
We need to move forward and get closer and closer and closer, Look, I mean, this morning I'm reading something about some software for intercepting WhatsApp messages and so on, which has been developed by an Israeli company. We should be concerned about it. You understand? It's not just the law on paper, it's also the advancement in technology. How are we coping up with technology? How are we making sure that technology does not become too intrusive? I'm told, for example, that if you have a smart television, it can be used to spy on you. You understand? So what is the technological antidote to that and so on? There's so many things that we need to worry about.
Now, we talked about earlier, you mentioned the accountability and responsibility and your concern for some saying that when the media go on the line that they are going, some freedoms that we're enjoying will be curtailed. But at what point then are we able to control the media, the things we say and the things we do, all in the name of media freedom?
Well, first of all, the larger population is constantly making choices. There are so many television stations, but we know the leading television stations. How did they come to be the leading television stations? It's a vote of confidence by the population. That's a process of selection. There are so many newspapers in this country, some cannot even sell 200 copies, per issue, and so on. That's a vote of confidence by the population, and so on. Now, media people, like all people, ought to be subject to the laws of this country. When politicians make inflammatory statements, they ought to be dealt with according to law. In much the same way that when journalists make inflammatory statements, they ought to be dealt with according to law and so on. The infractions of journalists do not and cannot justify, the institution of authoritarian or repressive regimes. That's all I'm saying.
You are the fourth estate of the realm, I should say we are. And if we are not responsible and accountable to at least the people that we serve and the things that we say, and also to the profession, some say we get what is coming to us. We deserve it.
Well, every citizen, no matter their profession, whether they work in sanitation, whether they work in medical science, whether they are teachers, whether they are welders, whether they are blacksmiths and so on, ought to be responsible.
Mr. Pratt, our role is much more because you know what we do as a society. If you, for instance, Mr. Kwesi Pratt, say something that is inflammatory, you know you're following, you know the things that it can cause, the implications of things that you say. You say that you shouldn't be responsible and accountable for it?
What about the paramount chiefs who have become demigods in our society? Everybody has to be responsible. You understand? And the fact that some people are not responsible would not justify the institution of authoritarian regimes. That's all I'm saying.
So, for instance, the media being slapped and the media, the invasion of the media offices to look for information when they think that is a threat to national security, that ought not to happen, you're saying?
Look, there are medical practitioners in our society who get it wrong, and it leads to the death of people. There have been many instances, I'm sure you are aware of many. Should we start beating up doctors? Should we start locking up doctors and so on? We shouldn't. So when journalists get it wrong, why are they not treated like doctors who get it wrong? Why are they not treated like engineers who get it wrong?
Because they have a body.
Why are they not treated like the politicians who get it wrong all the time?
If you talk about the other professions, for instance, they have a body that, controls them. Do we have any such? Because we have the GJA, but some have said that it's not every journalist that belongs. It's not mandatory for you to be part of the GJA, for instance. So there's no body that is regulating the media, per se.
Well, I don't think that there's any body that regulates mechanics. And mechanics can make mistakes which can lead to the death of several hundreds. You understand? I don't think that there's any body which regulates workers in the sanitation sector, of the national economy and so on. You understand? What is important is that everybody has to be responsible. Irresponsibility on the part of a section of society or individual should not justify the imposition of draconian laws on society. That's all I'm saying.
Well, so I would finally, though, want to find out from you. I'm sure you must have said this before, but it would be interesting to hear the history of media freedom, how you would trace it, because you've seen it all. So if you were to recount, what would it be?
Well, I haven't seen it all. I mean, I've read some accounts and so on. I mean, I've read about the struggle for independence and how some of the stalwarts of the independence movement, Bankole Timothy and others, ended up in prison because the colonial administration used the laws of sedition and so on. I've read about that. In recent times, I've seen people like Kofi Bedu publishing The Spokesman, and how they demonstrated courage and so on, seeing many people, join the struggle, do what they thought was proper and so on. We saw the free press and the role that it played, in the movement from military dictatorship to limited bourgeois democracy and so on. We've seen all of that. All of that, this is part of the struggle, you understand. Today, there are many people who are doing their best to breach that boundary. Many people, so many people, young people, enthusiastic journalists, and so on. Manasseh Azure, for example, is one of them. Highly respected Ghanaian journalist, and so on. All of them need to continue. They need to be encouraged to continue. Well, I'm not so sure that I'm doing much.
You are not?
No. But everybody needs to be encouraged to carry on this struggle. I don't see how you can describe a final point in this struggle. Because there will always be tension between those in authority who want to have their way and who want to do things in secrecy, and victims of those in authority who want openness and who want to live in a free society. Those tensions would always be there. I don't see when those tensions are going to vanish.
So in the last 1 or 2 years or so, I should say, the Media Foundation for West Africa, together with other media houses or civil society organizations, have counted up to about 20 infractions, at least on media personalities, including our own Latif Idris, and you've mentioned Manasseh, for instance. How do we reverse this trend? That's the objective of this main campaign on defending media freedom and reducing or reversing these attacks on media personalities. How do we do that?
Well, first of all, I'm impressed by what the media organizations are doing now. I mean, if they did that some time ago, perhaps life would be much easier for, practitioners. I mean, I was impressed when, after the arrest of the modern Ghana journalists, all of the media associations, including the Ghana Journalists Association, Private Newspaper Publishers Association, GBA, and so on, all of them came together to express outrage. And I said to myself that we are getting there. We are getting there. This should have happened a long time ago. But we are beginning to move in the right direction. Okay. Now, what should we do? We should just be ourselves and just do what we do. You understand? I think self-censorship is perhaps the biggest crime that we can commit against society. You understand? Why? The other thing that worries me is the blatant partisanship. You understand? Yes, I'm a journalist. I consider myself a socialist, and so on. The fact that I'm a socialist, does not mean that I should gloat when a non-socialist journalist gets into trouble. Journalism should unite all of us, irrespective of ideological inclination and so on, in the struggle to expand the space of freedom needed for our work. You understand? Unfortunately, somehow, in this country, you can even get MPP bread and NDC bread and so on. And it's spread over into the media. So you have media practitioners who rejoice when a section of the media is in trouble because they disagree with them politically and so on. I think it's not a very healthy situation. We need to form a strong organization of journalists to protect our profession, to protect the right of free expression, which does not belong to us alone, but belongs to everybody else and so on. I suspect that that's the way forward.
Together we stand at this point, that's what you look for.
Huh? Okay. So together we can die too.
Of course.
We can stand together, we can fall together, we can die together.
I think it's better we do that together than do it individually. Finally, just before we wrap up this, really the final one, we've been asking all those we speak to about our campaign, what they expect to see after this, and then hopefully what they think we should add in terms of defending media freedom. For you, Mr. Pratt, what are you hoping to see at the end of this campaign and what we ought to add?
Well, I'm satisfied with any effort, to draw awareness to violations of citizens' rights and to try and deepen the right of media personnel to practice their profession in dignity and in peace, So I can only commend you. I mean, there's nothing to add. I don't know better than you do, I think this is a very bold, courageous step, and others should follow in that step. As to what should happen at the end, I don't know when it's going to happen. It should continue. I mean, Ghana should become a better society, and Ghana should become an example that others can emulate.
Grateful, Mr. Kwesi Pratt Jr. That's the managing editor of the Insight newspaper. Thank you so much.
So from Kwesi Pratt Jr., let's hear from Alhassan Suhini. He's been speaking to my colleague Kojo Yankson.
Obvious to all, but the fight for media freedom might just be the most important fight for rights that we have yet seen in Ghana. Why? Because the media's only purpose is to serve the people with information. One of those who has done that job for a while and now finds himself in a position to make laws to possibly improve the rights of journalists and others operating in the media is Alhassan Suhini. Let's connect with him now and find out how he sees this latest campaign to demand media freedom. Mr. Suhini, it's good to speak to you.
Same here, Kojo. Good morning.
Good morning. And of course, this has been your wheelhouse for a very long time in your life. But today, you're a lawmaker. First, let me ask you this. Is there a need for a campaign for media freedom at this point? Or is Ghana still quite an example when it comes to that, especially in our region?
First of all, I need to commend your station for taking up this campaign, because obviously I think there is a need, and that need has been, there for some time now. I think it got to the head when we had the country losing its enviable position as #1 in Africa when it comes to media freedoms only in 2018, and the records show that it is likely to get worse, because as at that time, some of the worst that we have seen, for example, the murder of Ahmed Swale, the situation that led to Manasseh Azuri having to flee this country, had not yet been recorded. So it tells you that we are on a decline, and we are doing so fast, which is, for me, very sad, especially considering the atmosphere under which we are operating as media people. I talk of the atmosphere in reference to the person who is in charge of this country, or the people who are in charge of, for example, media and media freedoms in this country. I'm talking about His Excellency the President, who is on record to have represented the first radio station in this country that was supposed to be operating without authorization, just to advance media freedoms. And you recall the Radio Eye and Tarzan experience. He was the lawyer. And over the period, especially during his campaigns to be president, it was one of the trump cards, how friendly he is to the media and how he is a campaigner for media freedoms. And then you move from him and focus on the one in charge of the National Communication Authority. And he is also one person who is a veteran as far as media practice in Ghana is concerned, and how he, highlighted some of the ills that media operators, were taken through as a result of just practicing media in Ghana in those days, which led to the freedoms that we were able to attain at some point in time. And the National Security Minister, who recently was engulfed in the, kidnapping, I call it, of some, online journalists, and his role in the media, the Radio Eye, establishment. He was one of the board of directors of Radio Eye. So when you consider the fact that these are the people in charge of administering this country, and some of the things that we are, all concerned about are happening, then you think it is a shame. You think it is embarrassing. You think that we should not be having this discussion. But unfortunately, here we are.
Let's this way. How much of what is happening today is really the fault of government? I ask this because, Ahmed Swale was killed by criminals. Manasseh Azuri, we did a story about a private group of individuals who were doing the wrong thing. As a result, his life was at risk from those private individuals. So are we not stretching things if we try to hang it around the neck of government?
Could you, in the past, when media houses were, excuse my French, SHIT bombed, no minister did that, no government official did that. But it was, considered as one of the reasons why people expressed concern in terms of government's tolerance of the media in those days. Why? Because the people who carried out that act did so in defense, so to speak, of the administration that was in place at the time, because they found the reportage of those media houses to be critical of that administration. So it is not the case that you need to have identifiable faces in government, engage in muscling the media before you can directly link it to the government. Sometimes it is also in the way the government itself responds to some of these things. For example, in the case of Ahmed Swale, a certain member of parliament clearly was reckless, even if he was not responsible for his murder. But his recklessness somewhat contributed to the murder of Ahmed Swale. And you would have expected that that certain member of parliament, who especially is a member of the certain government, would have been taken through some rigorous, investigation process, even if for nothing at all, to clear his name. Unfortunately, you did not find, or you do not find that level of seriousness that you will expect, a friend of the media at the presidency, a friend of the media at the national security. We haven't seen that level of seriousness you will expect from people like that in a matter such as the Ahmed Swale's case. In the case of Manasseh Azure, the example that you have given also, it was, about a story that people in government did not find comfortable. As a result of that, your own media house has been boycotted by, government officials, and they do not appear on your platforms. So how do you, disassociate government from some of these, things that people have suffered? In the case of the online journalists, the modern Ghana journalists, they were actually, kidnapped by national security officers, and national security came out to admit that yes, they picked them up without any warrant, kept them for days.
They have power of arrest.
Well, but I'm saying that they need some level of, warrant per the last ruling to even do some of the things that they did, like going into their laptops and all that. But they did not exercise that legal right in the exercise of what, of their mandate, because they also need to have gone through some processes to do that. They didn't. So, and the national security is a state organ. So when you have some of these things, it is practically impossible to say that the government cannot be blamed for the situation that we find ourselves. I think that the government must set up, and like I said, it is a shame that we are having to discuss media freedoms under, an Akufo-Addo presidency. It is a big shame. And you see, Kojo, it is not only about some of these visible threats that we see. For me, it all started when the National Communication Authority, began clamping down on media that is considered critical, using authorization and licensing. And it was of concern to me because of a report that I have seen that was authored by the Freedom House International. And it is a respected, organization across the world that advances media freedoms. And they identified the use of authorization and licensing in countries lately to, reduce media freedoms. And they highlighted it seriously because of the, wide condemnation of using force and, brute force and all of that to intimidate media, that governments are beginning to use licensing and authorization as ways of, restricting critical media, and called for attention to be, put on those things. And for me, when it started happening, I thought that, as a country, we needed to rise up. We didn't. It is not, late that we are, but because of that, we are having to record some of these intolerance, involving the manhandling and the threats to media practitioners.
In that example, does the government not have the law on their side? I mean, even the media houses themselves admit that they were supposed to make those licensing and those payments to ensure that they remain legal.
Well, not all of them have made admissions without explanations. For example, some of them have also told us about their experiences when they tried to make those payments and how they were frustrated by the process. And so if I am supposed to make a payment to you that will allow me to operate, and because you have the power and authority to receive the payment, you frustrate the process and turn back to punish me for not making payments, that is, how you use regulation and authorization just to frustrate media that you find critical. And that for me is, an example in the, report that the Freedom House authored. Again, if you look at the application of, laws, the PDA, Preventive Detention Act, was a law, but I don't think this administration, the NPP administration, have forgiven the Nkrumah administration for using it against its people. So laws by itself, do not right the actions that are wrong, morally and practically. So yes, the National Communication Authority may have the right to do some of the things that they are doing, but how they go about doing it can tell you if the intention is, what do you call it? If the intention is clean, if the intention is genuine. But I don't see that because of how they, what was the need to take military men, armed to the teeth to these radio stations to close them down? In Rambo style. And the timing that they chose to do some of these things, after frustrating some of them when they tried to even regulate their operations. I clearly cannot find some of their excuses acceptable.
Right. Now, it's all well and good to talk about what is wrong. But what can you do? You're in Parliament, you're a lawmaker. Is there a solution through the House?
I have put a question to the Minister of Information. Unfortunately, it was supposed to be an urgent question. That question has, I think I put the question 3 weeks ago. A question that is supposed to be urgent, 3 weeks now, hasn't been responded to yet. Because I wanted to find out from the Minister of Information what he and his government is doing to, protect media freedoms and to ensure that Ghana, climbs back to that enviable position of being #1 in Africa. Unfortunately, 3 weeks down the line, the government is not even treating this matter as urgently as I would have expected them to. Because there's the need for the government to assure media practitioners that they are safe and that they can go about their responsibilities and duties without any hindrance, like we are seeing now, without any fear, like we are seeing now. Unfortunately, 3 weeks down the line, I'm yet to get a response from the Ministry of Information, and Parliament is just about rising. I hope the Minister of Information will treat the question as urgently as I hope that they were going to do, and perhaps give the people of Ghana and for that matter, media practitioners that assurance that they need, and also give us, programs that are in place to ensure that we together collectively work to reclaim that enviable position of being #1 in Africa.
Now, the Information Ministry has started a process to put together a framework to provide some manner of guidance for the enhancement of media freedom, but they also add that they are seeking to ensure media responsibility. Fair balance in your estimation?
I think that is too little. We already have the National Media Commission, we have the Ghana Journalists Association, they have their ethics, and I'm sure that any journalist worth his salt knows what is expected of him or her under the Code of Ethics of the Ghana Journalists Association. Again, we know what the National Media Commission expects of us. So it will be, a duplication, a waste of time to have the Minister of Information also coming up with ethics to enforce responsibility. The media is, yes, expected to be responsible, but the irresponsibility of a few should not be the basis for which, the atmosphere that we are operating under today is being created. It shouldn't be the reason for anybody to make it impossible for responsible media men like Anas Amria Anas, like Manasseh Azure, Manasseh Asure. I don't think that it should be a reason for anybody to make it impossible for journalists like that and yourself to have any fears about going about their business. So yes, responsible media is important. We as media people must also be championing that, but I don't think you can have any home without a Mensa.
So is that your estimation, that the irresponsible ones are in the minority? Or is it not rather the responsible media houses that are too few? In Accra alone, we have, about 300 radio stations or so. Can we really say that they're all operating at the right level of professionalism?
Obviously not. That is the point. But I can say on authority that those people who are not practicing professionally are in the minority. We have irresponsible politicians. Does that mean that all politicians are irresponsible? You know, we have corrupt politicians. We have many of them in government now. I mean, does that mean,
and in opposition?
does that mean that all politicians are bad? Should that be the reason why we should ignore, you know, anything that threatens the life of all politicians? I don't think it is fair to focus on the irresponsibility of a few, you know, and deny, you know, the majority the freedom that they require to do their job. And Kojo, what is even intriguing for me is the fact that when we started campaigning, or when our forebears started campaigning for media freedoms, I mean, yes, people knew that they had to be responsible, but that was not on the, you know, front burner. That wasn't, because I have spoken to some of our, you know, seniors, the veterans, and for example, when you speak with Mr. Malik Kweku Baako and Harun Atta, they are not proud of the stories that they did that led to their incarceration in those days. They are not proud of those stories. Given the second chance, I don't think they would have done those stories. But it didn't matter whether they were responsible or not at the time. It didn't matter. What was important was that freedom of speech, freedom of expression was under threat. You know, yes, we have come a long way, and there's a need for us to, you know, ensure and encourage responsibility. But I'm saying when it comes to media freedoms, when it comes to expansions of freedoms of the media, you know, responsibility has never been a hindrance for people to campaign for media freedoms. People in the past were not that responsible. You know, people in the past were not that responsible, even when we defended them and campaigned for their right to free expression. And I think it should be so even moving forward. I think it shouldn't be different today. Yes, it is important to remind media people of the need to be responsible, but we should not lose sight of the fact that the irresponsibility of a few cannot be a reason why we must restrict media freedoms. And in fact, in one of the speeches of the president, Nana Akufo-Addo, he made that point, that the irresponsibility of a few media men cannot justify the restriction of the freedoms, you know, that the media is currently enjoying in this country. So for me, it is not right for, you know, people in government to want to, you know, the need for people to be responsible in their reportage as justification for some of the very unpalatable things that many of our colleagues have suffered.
But somebody must take responsibility for making the media better. Because you're right, if Kweku Baako and Harun Atta are not proud of the stories they did back then, and they are seeking to be better, that should be the attitude of all media. You can't expect that to happen automatically. There must be something that makes the media operate to an acceptable standard for the benefit of the people.
True, and that is why I spoke about the ethics of the GJA. And so the GJA, I'm sure over the period, have been engaging some media practitioners, and also in some cases have intervened when they find, you know, some of the practitioners erring.
But has that been enough?
Well, it is a process. It is not an event. You cannot just expect them to, you know, and that is why even the Ministry of Information is launching a campaign, you know, or trying to collaborate with the media. It's not something that you can just wish away. It is a process.
So I guess that's you accepting that what the ministry is trying to do actually is useful.
What I am saying is that I find it to be a duplication. Yes, useful, but it's a duplication. I'm saying that I would have expected them to collaborate more with the GJA and the National Media Commission to enforce the already existing standards and the ethics. I
understand there's stakeholders in what the ministry is trying to do.
Yes, so well, a collaboration will be fine, but I'm saying that it is not enough. The attitude of government must change. The attitude of people in government must change towards the media. When there is the need to carry out an investigation, like in the case of Ahmed Swale, do so dispassionately and convincingly. Let the people see how abominable you find that act to be. And even when your members have been reckless in the course of that, you know, action, deal with them in a way that people will know that you do not countenance, you do not tolerate what is going on. Again, when you have people in your name and in your defense threatening journalists to the point where they have to flee this country, your attitude, your actions, your condemnations must be swift. It must be convincing. But when that is not done, no amount of collaboration with GJ and NMC and media practitioners will wish away the fear and the intimidation that people feel in doing their jobs. When again you use institutions like the NCA to use legislation to muzzle critical media, it is obvious. People see it. People know what you are doing. And if you turn around and pass the RTI or engage media, it's not going to wish away that, intolerance to media that is critical of you.
So if you are right, and for example, national security erred in the way they handled the two Ghana Web journalists, if you are right about that, what do you expect the president to do about it?
Like I said, first of all, it is a shame that we are having to discuss media freedoms under the presidency of Nana Akufo-Addo, who was touted as a human rights champion, as a champion of media freedoms. It is a shame that we are having to discuss media freedoms under his watch, and it is in his interest to, like I have said, begin to position himself and speak out if necessary, or take actions that will restore.
What sort of actions?
For example, the investigations that I speak about. I mean, even the American embassy is uncomfortable and unhappy about the level of investigation that has gone into the murder of Ahmed Swaleh. And the United Nations Security Council, I'm aware, have also written to the government, expressing concern about the handling of the murder of Ahmed Swaleh. So, and he is the commander-in-chief of the Ghana Armed Forces. He is also, his vice president is in charge of the police council. So we must see some level of investigation that will convince not just us, but also these independent watchers that he really wants to be a friend to the media as claimed before he became president. So I think he must intervene. And again, his own party, for boycotting multimedia, simply for doing a story that was critical of, his government, is shameful. So I think that he must have an interest in how some of these things are exposing the deception that was built around him to be president.
Let me ask about the actions that they have taken. So when Manasseh's troubles began, they provided him with protection. I believe in fact, they are still doing that. Would you say that that is sufficient action?
You see, the people who were in Manasseh's video were operating in a government facility, the castle. They are known. The people who I am sure were uncomfortable with this, story that Manasseh did, are, I'm sure, are signs of this government, even if they are not appointees.
Well,
but they are foot soldiers. Yes, I'm saying, I'm sure that they are, because, I mean, they were not happy with the story because they thought it exposed, a certain inconsistency, given the rhetorics that the president was engaging at the time after the Ayawaso West Wagon incident. So I'm saying that if the national security wants to find the people who, were threatening Manasseh, I'm sure they can do that. They don't have to give him perpetual security. They just have to eliminate the threat. And I'm sure they have the capacity to do that, but they don't want to, in my view. If they want to find out those people who are threatening him, they can find out those people and deal with them in a way that it will become a disincentive to others to even contemplate that. But they are not. And so giving him perpetual security for me is neither here nor there.
How about the Ghana Web situation? What action do you expect the president to take?
Again, I think that the president must also, call the national security to order. He must demonstrate that he doesn't sanction what happened. I mean, the arrest of those journalists, the detention, and the, humiliation we are told they were taken through. He must say something. He must condemn it, at least.
But will condemnation be enough? If really what happened was a violation of their rights, the way you believe it to be, is condemnation enough?
Well, at this moment, I think so, because there are some court processes that are underway. I will expect that after a condemnation, he will also monitor the process to ensure that, the parties are treated fairly and that government does not manipulate, the processes like I see happening, behind the scenes. That is how I feel. But I think that he must condemn it, and I'm sure his condemnation alone will, serve as basis for people who would have loved to manipulate it in the interest of government to also stay away from it.
Now, we can't deny the fact that violation of media freedoms are not new. Even if there is an argument that they are on the increase, they are not new. We all remember what Stan Dogwe did to a journalist here in this country, as smashing his recorder, attacking him. We've seen actually same Stan Dogwe attacking foreign journalists as well. And those aren't the only examples. That horrendous accident that resulted in the death of the journalist under former President Mahama, the aftermath also condemned for not being the best way of treating that situation. So I'm wondering if this is not a political issue, as clearly I've demonstrated. It's not a partisan issue. It's a general issue in this country. Should we not be seeking a solution that is non-partisan, non-accusatory, more reconciliatory, bipartisan?
Well, you see, you are right that this is not the first time journalists have, had to suffer one, uncomfortable situation or the other in the course of their jobs. I mean, you can go as far back as, President Rawlings, that President Kufuor, and the things that happened in his house with TV3 journalists, the party headquarters where the inside newspaper had the, balls, and all that squeeze. But what I see happening now, which is different, is the level of tolerance that I see in the media fraternity. In the past, we tolerated less. I mean, when Stan Dogwe, for example, was reported to have, destroyed a journalist recorder. I mean, look at the hula baloo in this country over that matter. I mean, journalists petitioned the president to dismiss him and all of that. And many of those examples, the tolerance level of the media then was low than I find it now.
Again, the reaction of government back then was to do nothing.
Well, but the point I'm making is that, I mean, I am not to speak for Stan Dogwe in this case, but he did deny some of the things that were attributed to him. He did deny. What maybe was not clear to all of us was whether an investigation established what was alleged against him or established his denial. And so you'll be fair to say that government did nothing. But I'm saying it did not get to a point where journalists had to flee this country. That is worse. It did not get to a point where a journalist had to be shot in traffic. That is terrible. It did not get to a point where journalists had to stand on their hands and get manhandled under a national security facility. But our level of tolerance then was higher than it is now. And that is what I find...
Level of tolerance was lower, you mean?
I mean, it was lower. I mean, it was higher. At the time, it was low because we did not tolerate that. But now we are tolerating, worse that is happening. At least the noise that we heard then, is louder than what we are hearing now. That is why I started by commending your media house for taking up this campaign.
Right. Okay. Well, I think we're running out of time. Yeah. But just to wrap up, do you predict this getting better or worse?
Well, so far I don't see anything that gives me the hope that it will get better. But I pray it does get better.
I want to thank you for your time.
Thank you,
Alhassan Suhini.
And that's Kojo Yangson's conversation with the Member of Parliament, Alhassan Suhini. We've got to apologize for the break in sound towards the end of that conversation and intermittently throughout the conversation. But join this all-important conversation and use the hashtag Defend Media Freedom. It's our ongoing campaign. You're still watching the AM show. Stay with us. We've still got quite a bit to come before we close at 9.